Lady Justice is a true crime podcast, therefore deals with incidents of violence, disturbing imagery and explicit content. Listener discretion is advised. The Lady Justice podcast wishes to offer their deepest condolences to the victims' families and wishes to offer thanks to those that work in emergency services. Hello my lovelies and welcome to Lady Justice, a true crime podcast. Lady Justice is a weekly podcast that covers fascinating cases both past and present. My name is Chantal and I'm your friendly true crime junkie with slight caffeine addiction issues. I hope everyone is incredibly well and enjoying a glorious week, and before I get into this week's episode, I just want to ask you guys a favour. Please support this podcast by subscribing, leaving a review, hopefully positive, and because sharing is caring, I do want you to tell your friends, your family, colleagues, neighbours, your local librarian, the people you get stuck with in a train carriage, about Lady Justice just to help it grow. It would make the world a difference. And, if you want to contact me about anything at all, please feel free to do so via social media or my email, which you'll find in the show notes. I've had some great feedback on my first episode, and I'm really trying to take everything on board. I also want to give a huge shout out to my long-suffering friends who have put up with me throughout this entire ordeal. You guys really are amazing, and I'm very proud to have each and every one of you in my life. So, without further ado, this case is one that's based in the northeast of England, and the town of Billingham in Teesside to be more precise. Billingham is about 8 miles away from Middlesbrough, the home of the delicious Parmo, and well, let's just say up the borough for those football fans. There's some fun tidbits about Billingham. It's the hometown of Billy Elliot himself, Jamie Bell, and of Jet from Gladiators. If you remember it, it was like a 90s TV show. It was bloody brilliant. It's also the home of Paul Smith, the lead vocals in the band Maximo Park, who, by the way, is a lovely guy and he is a brilliant laugh. If you're ever in the area, hit up the Forum, as it's got a great ice skating rink and a lovely little theatre. The town is one of those stereotypical places where everyone knows everyone, and that's why this case caused such a stir across Teesside. In 1989, the body of a young single mother was found behind a bath panel, 80 days after a forensic search of the family home. How was this missed, and why did it take 17 years and almost 3 trials to convict a callous murderer? All my sources will be listed in the show notes, and I'll be primarily using information provided by newspaper reports, both local and national, information provided by interviews with some of the residents of Billingham, which I offer thanks for, and the book For the Love of Julie by the victim's mother, Anne Ming. My daughter Julie was a funny mixture of introvert and extrovert. She was shy as a child, but could be feisty in arguments when she thought she was in the right, and she didn't let anyone walk over her. She was hopelessly messy at home, dropping clothes where she took them off and leaving teacups lying around. But she never stepped out of the house without being perfectly groomed. She wouldn't want to be the centre of attention in a crowd, but around those she loved, she never stopped talking, telling us anything and everything that was going through her head. Julie was beautiful from the day she was born, with slight oriental look from her dad's side of the family, and dark colouring that let her get away with wearing the most dazzling bright colours. As a little girl, she loved dressing her Cindy dolls for hours on end, and in her teens it was herself that she dressed up. She'd wear ridiculously high heels, super tight skirts and trousers showing off her perfect slim figure, and eccentric shirts and jackets all layered on top of each other. Her hairstyle changed from month to month, but whether it was Boy George dreadlocks wrapped in rags or a bright turquoise fringe, nothing fazed me. No matter how flamboyant an outfit she put together, she always looked stunning. Julie had a dry, some would say warped sense of humour, and an infectious giggle that bubbled out at inappropriate moments. She liked dancing, gymnastics, and doing people's hair for them. She was a fantastic mother to her little boy Kevin, and fiercely loyal to her family and close circle of good friends. She was full of life and always fun to be with. She was my little girl and I adored her. That was the opening of the book by Anne Ming, For the Love of Julie. It describes in vivid colour the dynamic and loved daughter, wife and mother, Julie Hogg. Julie was born to Anne and Charlie Ming in Middlesbrough. During her teens, she and her older brother Gary and younger sister Angela moved with the family to Billingham, where their grandmother lived. The Ming family led an ordinary life with all the ups and downs that the various years bring. Julie was a daddy's girl and was very close to her family, constantly in contact with those that she loved. At 16, whilst attending a youth club, she met Julie Hogg, who was 2 years her senior. They rapidly fell in love. He worked as a painter and decorator, and when Julie left school, she followed her passion and began training as a hairdresser. Everyone that came into contact with Julie thought incredibly high of her, and when she was wed at 18 years old in 1985, everyone welcomed the celebration. At the happy couple's wedding reception, they danced to Julie's favourite song, looked on by a proud circle of family and friends. Life was settled for Julie. She and Andrew had moved into a house just a few streets away from Anne at 27 Grange Avenue in Billingham. Just a year later, in 1986, the couple gave birth to their son Kevin. Andrew played football every Sunday, and Julie took part-time work as a delivery girl at the pizza shop, Mr. Macaroni's on Station Road, not far from her house. Over the years, however, the relationship began to become strained. They were wed young, they had a small child, which is never easy, and they began to drift apart. Although they still cared for one another, they began to think about taking a separation. When a job offer was given to Andrew during 1989, they'd agreed that maybe it was a good opportunity to take a break. On Wednesday, November 15th, 1989, the day before Julie was due to apply for her legal separation from her husband, she waited for her mum to pick up her 3-year-old son, Kevin. Andrew had left for London the month before, and she was now facing single motherhood. She must have been feeling so incredibly stressed and vulnerable as she began to tap into her support system. Julie was not unlike me, in which everything must be organised and every detail fussed upon. So when her mother arrived, she begged for a favour. She'd asked her mum to come with her to Stockton when she applied for the separation, which of course Anne agreed to. As Julie was due to work the late shift at the pizza shop, she began to worry that maybe she might not wake up in the morning. So she asked her mum to call her to make sure that she was awake and ready by the time that they were due to leave. Anne also agreed to this, and once Anne had calmed her daughter's nerves and Julie kissed her son goodbye, they left to go back home. The need to be reassured just one more time hit Julie once again, and just as Anne had got Kevin into her house, the landline rang out. "It's just me again, Mum," she said. "You won't forget to ring me in the morning early, will ya?" "Stop worrying," she grumbled. "I'll be ringing you." That was the last time that Julie would speak to her family. The alarm was raised early the next morning on the 16th of November. Anne had rung her daughter promptly at 7:30, but she didn't get an answer. She wasn't too worried, thinking that Julie had just slept through the ringing, so she got Kevin dressed and in the car seat, ready to pop round and knock on the door. It didn't take them long to arrive outside the terraced property, and as Anne looked up the house, she felt it was a bit strange that by 8 o'clock all of Julie's curtains were still drawn. It just didn't seem right. As mobile phones were not really a thing back then, she went to the phone box and tried Julie's number again, but there was no answer. She went back to the house, and she had an uneasy feeling in her stomach. She'd asked the neighbours if they'd seen her, and the man from across the road wasn't even sure she returned the night before. She tried the phone box once again and rang around Julie's friends, but nobody had heard from Julie. She went back to the house, and Julie's next door neighbour and Anne's friend Kath was outside the front of the house. She'd asked if she'd seen or heard of Julie, but she was told no, there was not a peep that came from 27 Grange Avenue. Anne was starting to get considerably worried at this point. This was so unlike her daughter. She knew something wasn't right. She didn't have a key to the house, so she rang her son Gary, who was working just a short distance away, to come and see if he could break a window so they could get in. Gary broke the small window by the back door that led into the kitchen. As he walked through the silent house, he noticed the place was impeccable. Not even a coffee cup was on the side. There was no clothes laying about, and that's when they knew something was definitely wrong. Thinking that maybe she'd had a crash whilst on her delivery job, Anne raced down to Billingham police station to explain that Julie had gone missing during the night and to inquire if there'd been any accidents. But nothing had been reported. Going back to Julie's house just one more time, Kath stopped Anne and asked if there'd been any further word. Kath's son, Mark Ward, was sat at the kitchen table with one of his friends, Billy Dunlop. They glanced up because they knew Julie too, but they didn't know anything either. Anne asked for Kath to keep her eyes open and to let her know if Julie returned home, which she obviously agreed to. Hours went by as they called everyone they knew to ask if anybody'd heard anything from Julie. They called Andrew's parents to see if she'd gone to see Andrew, thinking that maybe it was last-minute nerves about the separation. Later that day, on the Thursday evening, Julie's mum, dad and brother decided that maybe they'll go and check in on the pizza shop to see if they knew anything. When they arrived, they told staff that Julie had disappeared, and they wanted to know which one of them had driven her home the night before. That's when the tensions began to rise. The men at the pizza shop became defensive, and no one owned up to driving her anywhere. No one had seen anything. Charlie, Julie's dad, had become angry, and after seeing one of the staff that was holding a knife, a fight broke out. The family of Julie were upset, and no one could give them any answers to where their beautiful 22-year-old girl was. That night, Gary and Charlie were arrested and held overnight for disorderly conduct. The hours passed into days, and the police were adamant that Julie had just gone off somewhere, and that it was too soon to report the young mum missing. Tales of how she may have gone to a nightclub and was sleeping off somewhere for a day and a half were told. The police even suggested to the family that she may have just gone off to London to visit a friend by hitchhiking on the A19. On the Saturday, 3 days missing, Anne arrived at Stockton Police Station. Whilst waiting in the unusually large queue, she noticed 2 of the staff members for Mr. Macaroni's, the pizza shop. Julie's mother became enraged and began to scream at the men, "What did you do with my daughter?" And Inspector Lee appeared and began to calm the situation. Anne felt like no one was taking her seriously. Inspector Lee tried to ensure her that they had decided that maybe there was a cause for concern and had agreed to send 5 forensic officers to her home to rule out any foul play. A woman disappearing from behind closed curtains with no trace had finally started to get the attention that was needed. On the following Monday, a detailed search had begun at Julie's home. Fingerprints were taken and every room was searched. During the 5-day search, Inspector Lee asked if Anne could attend the property to see if any of Julie's items were missing, and of course, as any mother would, she said yes, and a police officer was arranged to pick her up. After an hour or so, no one had arrived to escort Anne to the property, so she decided to ring Julie's landline to ask if someone would be there shortly. A chirpy voice answered the phone, and after a short conversation, Anne plucked up the courage to ask if anything had been found, and that's why nobody had come yet. The response will blow your mind. "Well, there's no dead bodies here, if that's what you mean. It's just..." After Anne had gone to the property, she reported that nothing was missing. In fact, her daily medication was in its usual spot. No clothes or makeup was taken. All her shoes were still lined up. Everything was still in her home. As nothing had been found during the search of the property, the police decided that maybe Julie had just taken off. The year before, Julie had gone to London to visit the one other person she knew other than Andrew in the capital. A press release was issued in London and the surrounding areas, and although there had been a woman that was mistakenly identified as looking like Julie, there were no leads. Police even released her national health number, as she would have required medication. A week after the house was searched by police, the alarm that was fitted to the property began to sound at the police station. It was 2:45 a.m. on the 23rd of November 1989. A mystery key holder had secretly entered the house. Police were immediately dispatched. However, upon their arrival just minutes later at the property, there was no one there, and a chill came from an open kitchen window. The television had been moved to the kitchen countertop, and a singular videocassette tape was taken. No forced entry was officially logged, and it was put down to a burglary. The trail had gone cold, and all the police could tell the worried family was that she must have run away. 10 weeks after Julie went missing on the 1st of February 1990, as planned by Stockton-on-Tees Borough Council, the houses along Grange Avenue were under refurbishment. Workmen and plumbers were allowed entry into the Hogg family home to install central heating. This was completed successfully, and it was agreed to by Andrew Hogg, as he'd arranged to move back into the property. I'm now going to read again from Anne Ming's book, as it gives a detailed account of what was to come on the 5th of February. The first day of February, Andrew went back to Grange Avenue again to start clearing up. The police had left a lot of mess with all the fingerprint dust, and it was going to take him several days to clean it enough for him and Kevin to move back into the property. The first thing he did was switch on the gas heating behind the sitting room fire and tried to get rid of the chill and make the place feel more lived in. The radiators creaked and cracked into life and the warmth slowly spread through the rooms, forcing out the chill. He phones me up at tea time to let me know how he's getting on. There's a horrible smell in the bathroom, he told me. That'll be the toilet after all these weeks, I said. Put some bleach down and don't use it for a while. Andrew had told me he wasn't going back to the house over the weekend, but would be there on the Monday morning to finish the clearing up. When I woke up on the Sunday morning, I noticed I had some scratches on the back of my hand. It reminded me of Julie and the way she used to threaten to scratch her brother and sister when they annoyed her. She always kept her nails long. I showed Angela whilst we were having breakfast. This reminds me of Julie, I told her. Maybe she's trying to communicate with us from the other side. Oh, shut up, owl mum, Angela said, shuddering. Stop being so spooky. I knew it was probably being silly, but I just had a funny feeling, which I just could not explain. I didn't want to say any more. That afternoon, I was in the car on my own, and I started talking out loud to Julie, just as I would have done if she'd been sat beside me. If only I knew whether you were dead or alive, I told her. Only I can't carry on any longer like this, not knowing. I felt close to my breaking point, as if I soon wouldn't be able to cope, even on a day-to-day basis, not even for Kevin's sake. On the following day, I knew Andrew would be back at the house working. I was due to take Kevin to his playgroup at 1:30, so I thought I would drop in on the way to see how Andrew was getting on, and to remind him to pick up Kevin again at 3 o'clock. We drove up and parked. Kevin wanted to come in and see his dad too, so we walked up the front path together. I knocked on the front door and Andrew opened it to us. Have you got rid of that smell? I asked as we went through into the kitchen. No, he said. It's getting worse. Oh, get out the way, I said. I'll go and see for myself. I left Kevin chatting happily with his dad in the kitchen and marched upstairs to investigate, wondering why men are always so useless at these sort of practical things. Halfway up the stairs, the stench reached my nostrils. I'd been working for 20 years in an operating theatre by then, and deep down I knew what it was. But my brain wouldn't let me accept that was possible. There must be some other explanation. A dirty sanitary towel, maybe, wedged in a corner somewhere and rotting away. Whatever it was, please God, it wasn't Julie. It was as if I was outside my own body, seeing myself go up those stairs and into the bathroom, as I was watching a CCTV screen. I'm told it's called psychic numbing, a condition caused by intense shock. There couldn't be anything that bad in the house, I was telling myself, because the police hadn't found anything. 5 forensic officers had been there for 5 days and found nothing. Inspector Lee had guaranteed me nothing had happened to Julie inside those walls. There's no dead bodies in here if that's what you mean, the detective had said. There had to be a much simpler explanation for the smell. As I went into the bathroom, it looked the same as it had done the day that I'd been there with Angela and the police. I looked behind the toilet and behind the basin, but there was nothing hidden there that could have been causing the problem. Before going to London, Andrew had stripped off the wall tiles, intending to replace them, but hadn't yet got around to doing it. I wondered if it might be the fixative on the walls that was making the smell. I leant across the bath to sniff, my knees pressed against the flimsy hardboard panel on the side. The wall smelt of nothing, but the panel was loose and a gap sprang open under the pressure from my leg. The smell suddenly grew much stronger, almost overwhelming. Whatever was causing the smell was under the bath. Part of my brain told me that I was going to find Julie there, but how was that possible? The police had been in there for 5 whole days. They would have obviously found a body if it was there. I was being stupid and melodramatic to even consider such a possibility. So what was it? Maybe a rat had died there? I had to look and see to put my mind at rest. I was too confused, and it was all happening too fast for me to be able to imagine what effect it would have had on me if I did find Julie under there. So many thoughts and feelings were crowding in at once, making it impossible for me to think straight. Working on automatic pilot, I knelt down and pulled back the panel so I could peer behind it. Even though it was wrapped in a blanket, I knew what I was seeing was a body. The stench billowed out, filling my lungs and making me retch. I let go of the panel, allowing it to spring back into place, and scrambled down the stairs, screaming hysterically for Andrew, the smell filling my lungs and head, unable to control myself, not even enough to protect Kevin. Kevin was standing beside me, staring up at his hysterical grandmother. I grabbed Andrew's arm. Please tell me it isn't her, I begged. Please. I'll get the screwdriver, he said, as calmly as he could, and I'll take the panel off and see what's there. I couldn't stop weeping and shaking, even though poor little Kevin started crying as his dad went upstairs. I lifted him up, hugging him tight, trying to comfort him, even though I couldn't quite quieten my own sobbing. There was a terrible few seconds of nothing, as Andrew must have been undoing the screws. A few moments when it was still possible I had imagined it, and none of it was true. But then I heard his shout as he lifted the panel off, and I knew it was all too real. "Oh, Jesus Christ, no," he exclaimed. "What do I do?" he shouted as he thundered down the stairs. "What do I do?" "Dial 999, I yelled. I put Kevin down and I ran out of the house, desperate to get away, frantic to get help. I just wanted it all to be not true. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't work out what to do. I was still screaming like a madwoman as I burst into Kath's house next door. "She's under the bath," I shrieked. "She's under the bath." A police investigation was immediately launched, with over 40 officers tasked with finding the culprit of this horrendous act. The family was suffering with the complete shock of discovering Julie's body and blamed police. They blamed police because just weeks before, they had sent forensic officers into the house and found nothing. They were angry because they were pushed aside when they knew Julie hadn't just gone missing and abandoned her young son and loving family. Andrew was immediately taken into police custody when the decomposing body was uncovered from under the bath. He was questioned for over 30 hours. Distraught, he answered every question, and when he was released, he rang Julie's family to pick him up from Stockton Police Station. When he entered the car, he sobbed uncontrollably, and the pain shared by Julie's family swelled. Every single person that had come into contact with Julie in the 12 hours previous to her assumed time of death was spoken to. Statements were taken by neighbours, friends and known acquaintances. An advanced post-mortem took place. However, due to the severely advanced state of decomposition, no cause of death could be recorded. However, it was suggested that it could have been due to strangulation or suffocation. Now I'm going to describe something that's pretty horrific, as Julie was subject to a particularly brutal and violent sexual assault. So if you are uncomfortable with this, I would suggest you skip forward just a bit. The following is from the pathologist report. There was present about the body only a single unequivocal injury. This consisted of a huge vertically running laceration running the whole entire length of the vagina, posteriorly and on the left. This tear entered the stomach cavity. It represents the result of some extreme force of violence, such as the violent insertion of a foreign body into the vagina resulting in gross distension of the organ. Insertion of a fist or a foot is less likely. The lesion could not have been caused by normal sexual intercourse and must be taken to be a result of a deliberate act of violence, perhaps even a violation or defilement. It is possible that the injury occurred in life. If so, it would have caused pain, shock and heavy bleeding. It is only possible that death could ensure acutely. It is more likely that the injury occurred after death, however, as an act of mutilation. Julie's naked body was found wrapped in a white blanket, and even though DNA profiling was still quite new, the investigation took every opportunity they could. They sent the blanket for testing. Meanwhile, as inquiries in the local community continued, 2 young men were taken into Stockton Police Station more than once for interview. They were known to have spent time with Julie, and the police were suspicious. One of these young men was Mark Ward, Julie's neighbour, who was 24 years old. He had known Julie for around 6 years, and on the night she went missing, he was attending a stag do at Billingham Rugby Club. He was reportedly highly intoxicated, and his mum had told police that he had come home and slumped in bed by 1 a.m. After being interviewed by police 11 times, he was most definitely on the police's radar. Someone else that was high on the police suspect list was Mark Ward's friend, Billy Dunlop. He had also been to the stag do, and after attempting to get on stage with a stripper, he then proceeded to get his spam javelin out, and 2 door staff intervened. Billy had had a fight with a man, and whilst he was being thrown out of the club, he proceeded to headbutt a door. Believe it or not, the door won, and he had to make his way to the local hospital, Stockton General, which so happens to be where I was born. He was stitched up and sent on his way. The police had a history with Dunlop. His temper was well known, and he had recently broke up with his girlfriend and mother of his children. They thought that maybe he was further connected to Julie than others thought. During the investigation, Billy's housemate told police he had arrived home at 2 a.m. He had remembered this because his alarm clock was flashing at the side of his bed when he heard Billy clamber up the stairs. The arrest of William Vincent Dunlop came on the 14th of February 1990. It had come as a massive relief for the mourning family. He was known by the family. Andrew had gone to school with Billy, and he was known to be part of a group of drinking buddies in Billingham known as the Crazy Gang. Julie's mum Anne remembers him as a rather softly spoken individual, and didn't give the impression of someone who would be violent. However, she did not know the full truth and myths that surrounded the stocky 27-year-old. Billy was born in 1962, and his father raised him and his siblings under strict rules. he was taught how to fight. And at school he was known as a bit of a nutter. Always in trouble, local legends spread around by childhood friends gave him a reputation to be feared. One story from his youth, although not known to be true or not, was that at the age of 16 he escaped a borstal, which was a type of young offenders institution at the time. The police released a tracking dog to try and locate him. Now, some say when he was caught he decapitated the animal. One brilliantly told story to me by a group of old drinking buddies back in the day began like this. After an evening of light drinking of about 10 to 15 pints, he had finished his cigarette, when you were allowed to smoke in the pub. Now, clearly, Billy thought ashtrays were for the weak and proceeded to stand up, drop his kegs, pulled out his todger and stubbed out the lit tab on his helmet. Didn't even fucking flinch. Billy had a violent past. Known criminal activity goes back as far as 1975 when he was just 13 years old. However, his violent streak didn't show itself until his first appearance before Teesside Combined Court in 1980 when he was 18. He had viciously assaulted a man by repeatedly kicking the man in the face after a disagreement at the Billingham Players Theatre Group. Various attacks whilst in a drunken rage have been documented by the police, including an incident that involved Billy trespassing at a local property whilst in the possession of a knife. He was caught by the family's teenage daughter in the home. Subsequently, he punched the 15-year-old in the face so hard he split her face open, requiring stitches. When he wasn't working as a labourer, Billy spent his time torturing his girlfriend and 2 young sons. He spent most of his time with the crazy gang, harassing women, drinking excessively and playing sports. After Billy was charged with the murder of Julie Hogg at Teesside Magistrates Court, he was remanded to Durham Prison for, now get this, 1 week. He then returned to Billingham. He moved to Flodder's Way, lost his job but was free to walk around the same small town as Julie's family. Angela, Julie's younger sister, had seen him walking in the town, and it traumatised her. She shook from head to toe as she recalled meeting him to her family. Gary, her brother, and Charlie, her father, were warned by police to stay away from him. Anne launched a complaint about the conduct of Cleveland police. The comment of "no dead bodies in here" and the unprofessionalism of staff when she was repeatedly told that her daughter had just run away was nothing compared to the main issue. The fact that the police had searched the property, no one found Julie, and that meant that vital evidence could not be obtained. The results of the complaint? No disciplinary actions, just advice to staff. As Billy walked around a free man awaiting his trial, the family began to prepare for the funeral. Held on the 20th of April 1990 at St Mary's Church in Acklam, Middlesbrough, it was filled with family, childhood friends and those that loved her. Julie's favourite song was played on loop, and as you would expect, the family mourned desperately. Halfway through the ceremony, Anne sat staring at the coffin and suddenly burst into a primal scream before uncontrollably sobbing. The thoughts of discovering her dead daughter drowned her, and she was sedated shortly after. Billy's trial at Newcastle Crown Court began on the 7th of May 1991, overseen by Mr Justice Swinton Thomas, and lasted 2 weeks. Guy Whitburn QC, working with the prosecution counsel, opened with a statement about Julie being a loving mother who was surrounded by people that cared for her. She was a hard worker and had recently separated from her husband. However, he also told the jury that, and these are direct quotes from the trial, she was a sex maniac, had considerable sexual appetite, and was by any standards promiscuous. Now, Julie was a young woman, just 22, and had come out of a 6-year relationship beginning at just 16. She was entitled to a sex life, and although, well, I don't know whether it's because of the times or that's just how women and their sexuality are seen, but to me, however, she was labelled as a victim that was asking for it. Her sex life was to play a major role in this trial, and it's something we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail later. Evidence of the discovery was given by both Anne and Andrew. Andrew Hogg told the jury of the horror of discovering his estranged wife, saying, "I started taking the screws out of the panel. When I pulled it up, I noticed a white blanket. I could smell the smell, and I saw part of a forearm hanging loose." Forensic evidence was also presented to the jury, with expert witness Sarah Gray testifying that the white blanket contains a semen sample and 3 human hairs that was tested for DNA. This evidence was compared to a number of Julie's known male friends, and it was concluded to come from the defendant, Billy Dunlop. Further forensic evidence that came from the blanket that Julie was wrapped in included 9 acrylic fibres that matched a green striped rugby shirt. On the night of the murder, whilst at the stag do, Billy was seen wearing a green striped rugby shirt. Billy's housemate Don, who had previously told police during the initial questioning that Billy arrived home at 2 a.m, changed his story whilst in court and claimed that he wasn't even home by 4 a.m. Stephen Fisher, a fellow labourer, said that on Thursday the 16th, he arrived early in the morning to pick Billy up for a day's work. He told the court that when he arrived, Billy was still so intoxicated that he told him to stay in bed and not go in. The defence counsel, Franz Muller QC, tried to throw suspicion onto Billy's friend and fellow member of the crazy gang, Mark Ward. The next-door neighbour had also attended the disappointing stripper show at Billingham Rugby Club, and it was presented to him whilst in the witness box by Muller that in fact he had killed Julie and wanted to frame his friend. Mark watched porn a lot. The night he had been drinking to excess, he'd won a sex toy in the raffle, because who wouldn't want that prize, eh? It was then put to Mark Ward that in fact he thought that maybe Julie would be up for some experimenting and went to go see her. However, she refused him and he went on to kill her. Now this is where Julie's sexual activity comes into play. Mark Ward testified that he had a 6-year on-off sexual relationship with Julie. He said they would meet when Andrew went to his weekly football games on the Sunday, and it was purely physical. He also told the court, "Loads of lads have been with her while she's been married. She said to me, she just can't say no." Now cheating is something that can't quite ever be forgiven, and it was said in court that Andrew had once found his wife in bed with one of his friends. However, these things do happen, even when you don't want them to, and of course this may have been a factor in Julie and Andrew's marital breakdown. Mark spoke a lot about his sexual activity with Julie, what she enjoyed, and a particular night of passion that was of special interest. About 2 weeks before Julie's murder, Mark invited Billy to come have a drink with him and Julie. As the night rolled on, they began to have a threesome that they all enjoyed. However, Julie had told Mark at a later date that she was not sexually attracted to Billy. He openly admitted to the jury that Julie was easy. Her sexual activity in the 12 hours previous to her murder came under further scrutiny during the trial. As it was revealed that Julie also had sex with 3 further men before her sexual assault and subsequent death. These 3 men were her boyfriend Graham Popple, her boss from the takeaway, and her colleague whom had driven her home at 1 a.m. As the family watched on from the gallery, they waited until it was defendant Billy's turn to take the stand. Finally, when the day came, they watched with teary eyes. Billy seemed sincere when he said he didn't know what happened to Julie and just wanted the real killer to be caught. He said he didn't know how any of the forensic evidence appeared at the scene, but did admit to taking part in the 3-way. All Billy can remember was that he got drunk, failed to sleep with a stripper, headbutted a door, went to the hospital, remembered he got up the stairs, but that was it. He told the court that he thought he was being framed. Now there was one piece of evidence that came from the search of the lodgings that Billy was staying at during the time of the murder that was to come up in the trial. Julie's very own set of house keys were found hidden under the floorboards of Billy's bedroom. It had a distinctive Playboy keyring on the keys, and when it was tested, it had 2 fingerprints that matched Billy's. He told the court that he never had been in the house. He didn't know how the keys had got there. He didn't know how his fingerprints had gotten on the keyring. Maybe someone had planted them. It was put to Billy that he had in fact killed Julie because she did not want to have sex with him, and he flew into one of his famous rages and killed Julie via strangulation. He denied this. "I didn't do it. I wouldn't. She was a lovely girl, really quiet." During the trial, Billy's former girlfriend sat next to Anne in the gallery after giving evidence. She had approached Anne so she could give her some information. When Julie's body was found, the local Gazette newspaper was covering the story, and she used to read them to Billy. He never ever reacted. She had told Anne this so she could make up her own mind about the information, but also told her that yes, Billy was violent and there was a possibility he could have done it, but she was not sure. On the 23rd of May, the judge began his summing up, and all the sex, scandal and reality of small-time life was laid bare for the jury to examine, and to decide whether the stocky, soft-spoken man had killed the young doting mother. It was a difficult task, and the jury was put up in a hotel as deliberations lasted over 14 hours. When they returned to court, they had no majority verdict. It was devastation for the family, and Anne almost collapsed in the public gallery. It was ordered to be a mistrial, and a new trial was to take place with a new judge and jury. Billy Dunlop was remanded until this would take place. In the August of 1991, Billy underwent a minor procedure and was recovering at Middlesbrough General Hospital when he tried to escape custody and was involved in an incident with 2 police officers. In the October of the same year, the retrial began and lasted 10 days. The new judge was Mr. Justice Ognall, and much of the evidence was the same. The jury spent time listening to the case and spent a little over 5 hours deliberating the fate of both Julie's family and that of Billy. Unbelievably, no majority verdict could be reached, and as Billy sighed relief, his family cheered from the gallery. Anne broke down and was removed from the courthouse. The judge had acquitted Billy Dunlop, and he was free to return to Billingham, because in the law's eyes, he was an innocent man. Outside Newcastle Crown Court that day, the Dunlop family gave statements to the press, pleading with the people of Teesside to stop being hostile towards them and wishing that Julie's killer would be found and justice given to the family. That night they celebrated. Drinks were poured and the Dunlop family's spirits was high. Billy returned home with his girlfriend by his side, who had claimed to journalists that she had never doubted him, and soon Billy went back to his old ways, drinking and, abusing Jane, his girlfriend. He was often down the pubs by the old Billingham Green, and was actually reported by more than one person admitting to having got away with murder. Whilst drunk, he would boast about how he killed Julie that night. Reports were made to the police, the family were told, and no one quite believed the situation. Jane ended up escaping Billy's grasp and ran to a women's shelter in Manchester. As the thug he was, he found her and beat her. She was terrified by the man who admitted to murdering her young mum. Not every woman was so wary of him though. He met a young lady named Donna as they lived close to one another, and they soon started dating. His women-beaten days had begun again, and Donna soon left the relationship. She began to date someone considerably more stable, however, and this got Billy pissed. One night he found the couple at home and began to row with them. When they asked him to leave, his anger became uncontrollable, and he stabbed Donna in the chest with a carving fork and beat her boyfriend with a baseball bat so badly that he needed significant surgery to his face. Donna survived her collapsed lung, and Billy was sent to prison in 1997 for 7 years. The story still does not end here though. Whilst in prison, he befriended a female prison officer and began to boast about his previous murder of Julie Hogg. The officer went to her superiors and it was agreed that she could wear a wire. If this evidence could be recorded, he may be able to be kept in prison on perjury charges. He was. In fact, 6 years were ordered by the court as he admitted to lying in his previous 2 trials. Now, because he had admitted to murder, some may ask, if they are not familiar with UK law, why he was not trialed for it. Well, for 800 years, a law known as the double jeopardy was in play. This law stated that you could not be trialed twice for the same crime. As you can all imagine, Julie's family were beside themselves. They knew who had killed their precious daughter, and within a few short years, they knew he would be free to walk the streets again. That's when Anne decided to make a change. She'd been awarded a £20,000 settlement from Cleveland Police for the mishandling of Julie's murder case, and she started to use that money in endless campaigns to try and get the law changed. The family of Stephen Lawrence stood beside Anne, as many will know their situation was similar. Anne lobbied police chiefs and politicians, she stood on the street corners gathering signatures, and she gave every single interview to press that she could. Finally, after all that hard work, in 2005, the double jeopardy law was scrapped. And Billy must have shat himself, the little prick. Endless hours of work was put in by the CPS and the family whilst they worked at trying to build a fresh case against Billy. In April of 2006, the time had come once again to bring Billy forward to answer for his crimes. At his first hearing at the Old Bailey, Billy entered a plea of not guilty, and the family was hit by the sudden feeling of dread, thinking they would have to attend another trial. However, Billy did admit his guilt during the second hearing. Timothy Owen QC, speaking on behalf of Billy Dunlop, said that he had confessed out of remorse. During the sentencing in the October of that year, Jane, Billy's ex-girlfriend, asked to speak to Anne once again. She had agreed and they sat down in a quiet spot. Jane told her that she was so sorry, and the reason she had finally left the man that had murdered the woman sat opposite her's daughter was because during an argument he began to strangle her, and told her that's what he did to Julie. Billy's 2 sons had also asked to speak to Anne on the phone. They were now grown, and they apologised for their father's actions. Billy told the judge, Mr. Justice Calvert Smith, that on the night of the murder, he had gone to find Mark, but he was already in bed. Seeing that Julie's light was on at home, he asked for a cuppa and they sat in the kitchen. She laughed at his black eye, asking what had gotten the better of him. He then killed her. He looked around the garden trying to find a place to bury her body, however decided the loft would be a better idea. Hauling her tiny body up the stairs, he attempted to lift her into the attic space, but as he was so drunk he misjudged and her body fell on top of him. He then explained in graphic detail how difficult it was to place her under the bathtub. He never admitted to the sexual assault, or explained how his semen was on the white blanket that he had found on her bed. Billy was given a life sentence with a minimum period of 17 years. His earliest date for possible parole is 2021. He is currently serving his sentence at Franklin Prison in the Northeast. In 2017, Billy was brought up on historic rape and indecent assault charges. He was seen at Teesside Crown Court on 5 counts. These assaults were on children. He was 54 at the time and looked much the same as he had previously. Security was tightened and after a short trial he was found not guilty. He made a statement to the court that said, "I've been a violent man right through my life, but I don't molest children. It's as simple as that." Well, the man has standards, doesn't he? Prison is its own mini society, and I remember when I worked at a Cat B prison straight out of uni, the Poplins had their own hierarchy, and if he had been convicted of this, it would not have ended well for him. In 2019, Billy applied to be downgraded to a Cat C prison, an open prison, that would have granted him some time to be out in the public, hoping that his chances for release may come to fruition in 2021. This was refused, much to the victim's family relief. In 2007, Anne Ming was awarded an MBE for her brave fight for justice, and you know what? She deserves a medal the size of a bin lid. Right, so that was this week's episode. If there's anything you would like to talk about, please, get in touch. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You'll find everything in the show notes. This week's recommendation is True Crime Island. Now, I love Cambo and his rage-filled delivery, and I've been an Islander for almost 3 years. Oh, and happy birthday, by the way. I have a mug of rage that holds a shit ton of coffee, and I often scream boom fuckalunga just because I can. You know what you should do? Go pull up a deck chair, grab a beer, because True Crime Island is a must listen. Now, let's go put some goodness back in the world with a small act of kindness. This one is a small suggestion, and it is completely free. Go tell someone how much you care. Tell them how they inspire you, compliment their hair, tell them how much you love them. Now, go be good people, go be kind, go be safe, and most importantly, go be happy. Toodle pip and cheerio.